Hello, hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. I'm Duncan Chappell. I'm here with Tim Norris from Brivo. I'm going to be busking for a few minutes while people come into the webinar, get their cups of coffee in front of them, and then I'll get on to introductions, and then hand over to Tim for the bulk of the presentation. Let me just start off with a couple of housekeeping notes. You will have been in so many Zoom webinars by now, you don't need anything to tell you about them, but there is down at the bottom a Q&A panel. You can put your questions in there. I will throw questions at Tim if they are like immediately germane and very specific to the topic of the conversation. If they can wait till the end, then I will leave them until the end so that Tim can go through the meat of what Brivo has found out in this research. Obviously, we will record this, and not everybody who's registered will be able to attend. So we are recording this. We will wrap up the recording and share you a link to that, along with a PDF of the full report, so not just the highlights that Tim is able to present here. Let me just start off by introducing Tim. So Tim's the Senior Director for Global Product Marketing at Brivo. Tim's somebody who we've been working with for really an extended period of time, and is one of the most eloquent and kind of insight-driven product marketing specialists we've had the pleasure to work with, and brings to his role, and he's been at Brivo for a few years, but brings to that role prior experience at RSA Security, Sage. Look, this means that Tim has like both a strong understanding of product design, but also one that is very much rooted in listening to the audience, listening to customer trends, and that is really part of Brivo's experience and strength as well, which is why the trends report is something that has been a long running and extremely productive, very authoritative piece of research that's useful both for Brivo and its partners. Tim, I'm going to hand over to you and turn off my camera so you get the spotlight. But thank you so much for joining us today.
All right, thank you very much, Duncan. I really appreciate it. And like you said, we've been working together for a while, and it's been a great partnership. So really appreciate all that you all do, and really appreciate all that you all in the audience do as well in covering the space, you know, the security, physical security, smart buildings, smart spaces sort of area. So really appreciate and glad to have you all here. As Duncan said, today we're going to walk through a piece of research that we released about a month and a half, 2 months ago, our annual security trends report. And so we'll dive into some of the what we saw in the 2023 trends report. Certainly, as Duncan said, love to take your questions. There's plenty of time here at the end, and as you know, as relevant in between, we'll pick those up. But really, certainly, hope there's some insightful information here, and certainly want to discuss, you know, your questions as well. For those of you who may not be as familiar with Brivo, I know a number of you are, but just to give you kind of the quick skinny on who we are, we consider ourselves the comprehensive foundation for modern digitized properties. We were born in the cloud over 20 years ago, and we provide access control and really over 24 other services across our Brivo Access platform, our unified platform. From access control, identity management, video surveillance and integration, a whole open API ecosystem, which we'll dive into. And one of the areas where we are really focused on is understanding the data and analytics that are happening across the built environment, and how do we then also leverage that to make sort of building operations, security operations much simpler and much easier. So we are, like I said, an open platform. We have our own sort of hardware IoT devices, but also work well with others in over 100 different hardware and business software partners, largely in the prop tech space that we support, and ever growing. So just a quick, in a nutshell, a little bit about Brivo. When you think about, you know, who who we are and sort of the scale, right, that we have. We're the largest pure play cloud-based commercial access control system in the world. And why does that matter? Well, it matters to our enterprise customers and partners because what comes with that is scale, stability, the cybersecurity elements of operating a cloud-based access control system to meet the requirements of robust global enterprise customers, a channel of thousands of security integrator partners across the globe, and really over 7,000 trained technicians across that overall reseller channel. A couple of key stats you see here, I won't rattle them off, but the scale and scope of where Brivo is doing purely in the cloud is really kind of sets us apart from a number of other folks in the industry. All right, so that's enough of the commercial. And you guys aren't here to hear about Brivo piece, you're here to hear about the research. And so before we get into the meat of the report, there's one thing that I want to highlight. We highlight this in the report. And it's important to understand as we think about trends and what's going on in the workplace and the physical environments in which our employees are interacting. Almost 2/3 of the workforce will be millennials and Gen Z within the next 2 years. This isn't 10 years down the road. This is in 2025, so in 2 years. And if we're being real about what that means, millennials aren't the little punks that we used to think of when we say the millennial word. They're 30s and 40s, and they're taking leadership roles within organizations. And I can say that, little punks, because I am one. As we look at the older population of millennials taking on those leadership positions. What that means is the dynamics in the workforce are changing, and the expectations are changing by our employees, but also the expectations of those buying and purchasing and making decisions into security technology and other technologies within organizations is also changing. So if we think of that, keep that in our mind as we go through the results of what this survey is, you'll start to see, I think, what we see a shift when we think of traditional access control type of solutions and really starting to see this evolve. So that's my setup. Let's talk a little bit about the results of the report. So like Duncan said, we've been doing this report for a number of years now. This is our 6th annual report, and we do this in partnership with As Is International. As Is International is a global security professional organization that spans, almost, all 6 continents across the globe, and really a focus of not only the security integrator channel, but also everyday users, facility managers, security operations, everything from CSOs on down. This survey was international. We had almost 700 respondents, and almost half of them are coming outside of the US. So there is a global view within this report. And also it represents a cross-section of industries and job functions, like I said, everything from sort of the C-suite on down to the day-to-day operations folks. So a wide gamut of viewpoints that are encapsulated in this bit of research. All right, the get it started slide. So we think about the 5 trends, the 5 major things that we saw in this year's report are highlighted here on the screen. And so we will walk through each one of these in more detail, but just to kind of set the stage of what we're going to talk about in the meat of the conversation. The first and probably the most glaring trend that we see throughout, and you'll see this in a number of instances, is user experience and convenience are driving changes in security technology. And there's a bunch of things we want to unpack there, and we'll talk about that in a second. The other pieces that are kind of related are cloud-based access control with mobile and biometrics are moving to the mainstream, especially in the enterprise marketplace. And data and system integration, this whole kind of ecosystem and how we can understand what's going on in spaces is really that must-have and also a key driver in those areas. We'll talk a little bit about the cloud adoption and viewpoints of cloud adoption in the physical access space. Historically, within physical access control, been a bit of a laggard when we think about digital transformation, and we see that changing. And so we'll share some data there. And then lastly, we have a section of our report where we talk about from an end user perspective. So those corporate security officers and others, what do they view with the security integrators in the channel, and what are they looking for from them? We sell directly through a channel. And so trying to understand what is the viewpoint of those end users who are buying from those integrators. And as you all, as influencers and recommenders in the analyst community, to those end users. I think there's some interesting nuggets here and potentially an opportunity for you all to play some additional roles with those end users. So that's the tease. So let's dive into some of the results. So our first trend is all about experience, and experience matters. 84% of our respondents said, experience is significantly important as they're looking at making purchasing decisions. And we think about this, right? So how we bank, how we shop, Amazon, our Starbucks, and using our app, and we show up and our coffee is ready, how we engage with our friends and family, they're all digital, right? And so that experience is what we expect in our work life too. And so as we think about physical security, something that historically the mindset has been keep the people out, right? That all changes when we think about how do we, how do organizations roll out more fluid, more welcoming experiences for folks who are operating inside their facilities. And if I kind of I'm going to do a little tongue in cheek here, so bear with me for like a minute, but if we think about back to that, 2/3 of the workforce is basically going to be millennials or Gen Z. And, being one of those growing up, this is what we were told the workplace was going to be like. We're going to float in on our space car. We're going to hit a button on it. It's going to turn into a briefcase, and we're going to float into our office, and work is going to be great, right? Talk about, an amazing frictionless experience, right? This is kind of what we were promised. Or maybe it was this where, hey, Captain Picard walks up and the door knows it's him and it just opens and there's nothing to carry and hold and all of that kind of stuff. It's just super, auto magical, as I like to say. A little tongue in cheek here, but these are the types of experiences that we experience in other parts of our lives that we're wanting to see come into the workplace. But the problem is that our physical access, problems were not built for optimizing the experiences for the end user. And instead they end up being more like this, which, isn't super exciting to get up and go to every day. Feels, and in some cases is intimidating to certain populations of folks. And so, obviously there are certain elements where, physical security guards and those things are absolutely warranted. So not dissing on that. But what I'm saying is we have to think about the experience of the people that are coming. And what we saw in the results of this is that even the corporate security officers are seeing that experience really matters with that 84%. So just a setting the tone for where we're going to go. We also asked people in the survey, okay, so experience and convenience are important. And so what is the most convenient thing when you think about all the ways someone can gain access into a physical space? What they shared with us, and so we know this doesn't exactly map to reality of where the world is today as far as devices and things on facilities, but is where people are thinking things are going. So that facial recognition and authentication aspect, 71% said that Captain Picard experience, probably the most convenient and secure way to gain access. Second, coming in with over half, so a plurality, right, of using their phone as a second most convenient. And the things that we typically think of when we think of access control, so that fob or that plastic card, fall way down the list as far as what people believe and feel are convenient. So folks are starting to fall out of love with those. That kind of dovetails really nicely into what our trend number 2 was. So when we think of trend number 2, cloud-based access control with mobile and biometrics are moving mainstream. So what does that mean? There's 2 buckets here, and I'm going to talk about mobile, and then I'm going to talk about the biometrics. Mobile credentials are dominating, right, and are continuing to rise. And so within our research, 71% of respondents, so security professionals, said that at least half of their organization will be using mobile access and credentials over the next 3 years. And this trend has been moving this way for a long time. We see this in our previous reports, but we also see it from our perspective in our customers and our install base. Just last year, we crossed over 2 million mobile credential passes. So that's using, this device to get you into the door without having to have, a plastic card or a fob. This thing that I carry around with me every single day, have with me, nonstop as my actual credential. We've seen this trend really blow up. It's partly due to the pandemic, and we'll talk about a little bit from the ease of use from a management perspective. but it started before that. I think the pandemic has helped accelerate the usage of these credentials. We also see this growth, and we're continuing from a Brivo perspective, investing in mobile. So for example, like just last month, right before the ISC West show, if any of you were in attendance, we announced and launched our employee badge in Apple Wallet. So a partnership in using it with Apple and being able to leverage the Apple Wallet technology to host your employee badge, that credential within the Apple Wallet, and use the NFC technology within the wallet to simply tap and go and be able to enter a space. And so it's not just another credential in how we think about this technology, it's a whole new way of presenting access control and widening its applicability. And so access, we believe is now coming on par with those other consumerized interactions that we as humans experience every day, bring that consumerization of the workplace, further to that next step. I think the other piece, and we talk about the consumerization of the workplace, macro level, every portion of our life takes place on this phone, right? And so how we access things in our lives, from tickets to sporting events or Broadway shows, unlocking my car. I use this to start my car in the morning when it's cold to turn the heat on, right? All to even like our physical, driver's license IDs in states like here in Maryland, where our phone is really the center of our world. And the way we see the evolution of access control, as well as the overall experience in the workplace, all being driven directly with this device, taking that personal experience and moving it into the workplace. Lastly, talking about mobile credentials, a primary benefit that our respondents talked about is user convenience. So no surprise there. Hey, I don't have to, dig in my purse or my wallet or my bag to find my badge to get in the garage, all that kind of stuff. I just use my phone. Convenience was great. But the other part of this is how access credentials are managed, issued, and the increased security that they bring from an operations standpoint. So if you think about multi-factor authentication for employees using their phone as Face ID, which they use every day to unlock their phone and many times a day, right? Being able to enable that on places where you want a second factor of authentication to enter a space, right? Using that I'll call consumerized version of a multi-factor authentication that's built into the phone. Secondly, you're getting the behaviors that are what you've always wanted as a security professional. Meaning people will share their badge with whoever because they, forgot one or need something, all that kind of stuff. They're pieces of plastic, or it can be easily picked up, and used for some other reason. People are less likely to share this device, even with their friends, because their lives are being run out of that. So you're really getting the behavior that you've been telling people, don't share your badge. You're getting that behavior just inherent based on the device. And also there's additional elements of security, more so than the plastic cards, even, prox cards, old prox cards, which are still rampant within the wild, are so easy to clone. You can take it to the grocery store and clone it for, $5, right? That's not very secure. The security, that's built into these devices greatly enhances the overall protection of that credential. And then lastly, we think of the ease of use of mobile, right? The ability to issue, revoke, provide those credentials in a very easy, seamless way, where someone just gets an email and taps a button and they're magically brought in through the authentication processes, is much more important, especially as we think of, there's not, typically now someone sitting at that front desk who's there, to issue your badge and do those kinds of things. It's being done remotely. And so the use of mobile credentials really supports that. So I think that if I was going to sum up the mobile side of trend number 2, access control is really not this separate thing. It's really part of my digital life, and mobile is kind of a key driver of bringing into that digital life. There were 2 parts, though, to this trend. So it was mobile and biometrics. And so let's talk about the biometrics area. And this, surprising to me, more that it was more rampant than I had originally thought, is that there's a larger opportunity there. And so today's primary use case for biometrics in the physical space is really around a second factor for those secure areas. So that's 63% using biometrics as a second factor. But what we saw in the results is that there is increasing interest for people to use biometrics as that primary credential. We just talked about face, using your face and authenticating based on a face as a convenient way to get in. We're seeing this trend move in this direction where people are looking at biometrics in those, I'll call it everyday common area type of situations, more so than just those high security areas. When we think about the future of biometrics, so in the research, 60% of the respondents said they would be strongly considering biometrics in their buildings in the next 3 years. And so when I think about, for you all as the analyst community, understanding that at least this is the direction people are thinking. We know this is not a ubiquitous thing where every front lobby door in a building has a facial authentication type of device sitting there, but we are seeing this transition as we think of having that convenient and secure access. I also liken this to a little bit of the shift towards multi-factor authentication in our digital world, right? Everything from my grandma logging into her bank account now with her gets a passcode and has to type it into how I interact with my Okta and everything else that we use from a corporate perspective. Multi-factor authentication is just, baseline for everyday experience. I think, if I have a crystal ball, I think looking ahead, biometrics and using those types of authentication factors for access control are going to become that really mainstream area. All right. Let's move on into trend number 3. So we're halfway home. So I have to admit that this trend is something that we've seen year over year in our reports as a growing area of importance. Being able to understand and use the physical security data, right, really is a driver for our enterprise customers. Now even more so than ever, use cases pertaining to space optimization, site and facility utilization are trending and trending of those usage are really top business priorities. And I hear from chief security officers that they're now being able to provide more business value, which is a big thing when we talk in CISOs, CSOs. How do I provide more business value than being that cost center, right? And necessary for protecting our people and assets and digital life, but adding more business value. And so this is an area where they're having an opportunity to be able to play a stronger role in some of those business decisions. Integrations also bubble to the top and continue to be extremely important. As access control, as we believe, is not just so much keep the people out, but as the enabler of the office, residential, and commercial prop tech experience. So this ecosystem is continuing to grow. This is another one of these double dippers. So there's 2 things. So let's talk a minute about data. In one of the interviews that we had as part of this research, I spoke with a manager of global security operations for a major cybersecurity company, and he talked about, and this is a quote from him, "In my career, I have never delivered more data to the organization than I do today." And that data, when we sort of dug into this question and talked about, is, hey, what kind of data? What do you mean? Because people think of access control data as, okay, there was an incident or there was bad credential, you can kind of see those kind of things. But no, he's talking about looking at number of people that are occupying a space and for how long and what days, who's coming in, providing data on access to support HR and HR business partners for policies that they've implemented for 3 days a week in the office. So there's a use of this data is expanded beyond sort of that traditional security mindset to supporting other parts of the business. But when I talk data, a lot of times to our customers, to some of our resellers, even sometimes to analysts, I get a little bit of like, okay, what is this? Like kind of, because we think of it in a traditional sense. We think of it as, yes, there was an access event, Tim swiped his badge, I can see that, there's a log of it, yada, yada, yada. But there's a lot more than just open and close events. And so looking at deep insights and trending across, some of these primary domains from people, places, things, video, incorporating those components to a wide variety of events and putting that into, as we've built a data layer into our access control platform to combine all this and be able to understand what's going on within spaces, correlate that data together, and then apply even some of the advanced analytics for things like AI, machine learning. Like, this is really a powerful resource that has really gone underutilized by a lot of organizations, as well as, frankly, as competitors, those legacy players that are out there in our space. Some specific things that we look at, and that we believe the access control data that we have provide a better visibility into what's going on in things like occupancy, utilization, performance and maintenance, right? Security, as well as security operations, right? All of those are all kind of being able to pull out and support, like I said, not just security teams, but the other parts of the business. The second part of this double dipper was around end users needing integrated solutions, right? And so I don't think that's a shocker, right? We live in a world where interoperability of systems is absolutely critical. One of the things that bubbled to the top this year, in which we've seen even within our own database, is the connection of identity and access management systems and identity stores and HR systems to the physical access control system. And so you may say, like, yeah, no, duh, you should be doing that, right? But what we see in the real world is that in a lot of cases, the digital identity and the management of all of that, and this is, my background and where I came from before I came to Revo, is in that space. It lives within an IT function, whereas sometimes in organizations, the access to the building lives in a different organization. Isn't always as closely connected to IT. IT's involved for sure, but they're still kind of living somewhat in silos. So connecting those systems so that there's one source of identity from the physical and the digital, and that the interoperability, so with joiners, movers, and leavers, so new employees, people who move around to different roles and responsibilities or different facilities, to also when folks leave, that it's all connected and interoperable is absolutely critical. In an area where we're seeing a large number of our customers working with us and through their IT departments to be able to bring those two together. We are, I think, seeing this move to the physical and digital identity, really not just as from an ease of use of managing, physical identities within the operations side, but also as people start to understand business risks, security and compliance risks, and other things that are associated with having this sort of disconnected system. All right, we'll talk about our fourth trend here. So we're in the home stretch, and if you have questions, please put them into the chat, and we'll definitely talk about those here in just a couple minutes. So trend number 4, and so this is something that we have seen consistently, and really Brivo was on the forefront of cloud-based access control. We were cloud before cloud was cool here in the access control space. Our founder and CEO, Steve Van Til, started the company over 20 years ago with a mission of being a cloud-based solution for managing properties. And that's where we talked about being the foundation for the modern digital property. That's really the mentality we come from. Here in this year's survey, 2/3 of our respondents said that cloud-based access control improves their overall security, and another significant jump from what we've seen in previous years. Really believe this is just an ongoing rise in adoption of the cloud, right? Cloud is mainstream in every other part of the organization and enterprises. Digital transformation has been going on for 10+ years, but we're starting to see this move into the physical security space, right? And why shouldn't it, right? Why should security be the only part of the enterprise that's not, able to use the cloud? It really, it's kind of moving to a place where that doesn't even make sense in a lot of cases. So we're continuing to see this adoption and push to the cloud. And also as a way to move to centralization instead of individual on-premise systems living all over the globe, right? Bringing this into a unified cloud view is an area where organizations are and especially large those enterprises who are trying to bring data into their global security operations center, bringing all that stuff together, do it simply and easily with the cloud. So continues to be a driver. our last trend, which I mentioned, was focused on the security integrator. And so the security integrator is the channel, which we sell through, but the primary folks who are installing, informing those end users, supporting them on a day-to-day basis with their security system. And surprisingly, what we saw is that only 28% of people who buy security rely on their security integrators for information in this kind of really dynamically changing world. We talk about biometrics, we talk about mobile, we talk about all these things that are changing, the use of data. Many of the folks that we surveyed, 60%, consider their security integrators to be only somewhat knowledgeable of the technology. And more than a couple, so 13%, dismissed them outright as being knowledgeable. I think for you all play a certain important role in helping to be advocates and ability to showcase what's going on within the physical security space to your enterprise end user clients, because there is, it appears based on the data, a gap between what they're hearing from their security integrator partners and what's really going on from a transformation of the physical security space. We certainly work really closely with our security integrators to continue to drive and educate and help arm them with the right tools. But I think there is a place for you all, which in talking with a number of analysts, physical security is kind of it's a mature market. People already kind of know, but I think it's mature but it's rapidly changing, and so there's opportunities to really be that trusted advisor in those spaces. So that's my plug for you all, and that I think there's some opportunities there. Lastly, and then we'll get to some questions. We did ask the group of almost 700 security integrators, looking ahead, what are they excited about? What are they looking forward to over the next 3 years? And so we've talked about a number of these things as emerging technologies, or things that are moving from kind of either fringe to mainstream. And so there's a lot of excitement of what you see on the screen as far as of where people believe things are going, or where they're looking to even investigate and implement over the next 3 years. That facial recognition authentication, surprisingly, again, to me, soars to the top. The use of mobile, that's not as surprising to me, but moving through here, we didn't talk much about video in this conversation, and maybe in our next research briefing that we do, we can talk a little bit about video and what's going on from our artificial intelligence, how we're connecting that to the physical access components. Well, a lot of, a variety of things here, a lot of interest looking ahead. And so with that, that's the highlights from our trends report. And like Duncan said, you all will get a copy of the full report as soon as the presentation is done and the recording goes out and all that good stuff. But I'd love to open it up for questions.
Thanks, Tim. We've got a question. This was really about the Brivo solution set itself rather than the research, but about facial recognition. Do you support remote onboarding using a mobile device as part of a visitor or employee onboarding process?
Yeah, the onboarding within these facial authentication solutions can be a bit of a challenge. And so just we've shared publicly, we are working on, and later this year, we'll be rolling out a facial authentication solution, which if you're interested, happy to spend some time and talk through that with you all. But we will be rolling that out. How we are looking at the onboarding and enrollment of those users is really around looking at things, how to make it as frictionless as possible. So badge photos are typically still there. Someone still has a photo associated with their Workday entry or within the access control system. Mm-hmm. So bringing that in and then being able to use that as the enrollment or the reference image associated, so that there's not an additional step. There is an additional step when we look at consent, right? And so the whole notion of privacy and allowing someone to use my face or whatever, biometric we want to use, which is delivered through our mobile application, right? So that consent, I agree to do this, is delivered through that. But we're not asking people to enroll, or like when you set up your Face ID the first time, you got to do the whole like move your head around and all that good stuff. We're trying to remove that friction from the enrollment process.
Thank you so much, Tim. Another question, more on trends. Are you seeing a trend towards private cloud access control for larger enterprise companies?
So we do see that requests, right, come up around private clouds and that. So that is something that we do see emerge. When we talk to a lot of these large enterprise customers, and we talk about sort of the robustness of the cloud infrastructure in which we've deployed the SOC 2, the ISO, all of the sort of audits and requirements that we put in, we typically see that we satisfy their security requirements in which they're willing to go to the cloud infrastructure in which we've offered. But we do see that as a question.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Just a reminder, if there are questions that people want to ask, then just throw them into the chat bar at the bottom. Just to come back to this thing of like convenience, yeah. I think this is you've spoken about this very much as being like the key thing that people want. I think many organizations are, they're very distant from convenience at the moment. Yeah. I've seen demonstrations of Brivo's technology where you show the ability of the solution to weave together different data sources. Yeah. And even this can shock people. Yeah. So simply the ability to integrate data the way that you do is shocking. So that suggests that where most organizations are is some distance away from seamless conversions, from seamless convergence. What is underpinning the slowness of this? Is it the way that these technologies are themselves individually still emergent, or is it that organizations are too often building like selecting point solutions rather than starting from the challenge of integration?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things there. I think there's a macro, and then there's probably a more definitive answer. So when I think about the macro, so I come from the cybersecurity space, right? Especially in the identity management before I came to Brivo. And we would always have this conversation about secure or convenient, right? It was an or discussion. Because if you think about gaining digital access to things, the more prompts you put in front of someone, or more factors of authentication to get to something, or all these things, puts a barrier, right, for people to getting their job done. So we always have these arguments about, secure or convenient. Where we've seen that flip over the last few years, that it's an and, right? It's secure and convenient. And so it's an understanding, and you see this across a variety of industries, like I said, cyber, IAM solutions, and even in the physical side of it can be an and. So I think philosophically we've changed that mind. It's not just about keeping the bad guys out. It's make sure the right people have access to the right things or places at the time. Now, specifically, think to your question, why are we sort of lagging potentially in deploying some of these convenient solutions? I think there's a couple of specific things there. One is, yes, there are a lot of point solutions that are out there. Two, it's kind of in the physical security world, it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of mentality. So not really taking into context the desire for the convenience as a driving factor. What we saw in this report and from the research was that is changing, right? People want to make it more convenient and as part of how they access. So it's that. I also will, frankly, and this might be a little controversial, but I'll just say it anyway. It's also the changing demographic of the workforce, like we talked about in the beginning, right? As if 2/3 of the workforce are going to be millennial and Gen Z in 2 years. So that means a lot of them are already there now, right? There's a lot less apprehension to using things like my personal device, right? To open up my door at the office. Whereas boomer generations and other generations have been more skeptical of doing those types of things. So that barrier from the human side and the demographic side is also changing. Things like using my face. We hear this, I don't want to have my face, used for X, Y, and Z. Although those same people are using their face 52 times a day to unlock their phone. And so we're seeing this shift as far as people's behaviors and preferences. So that was a long way to answer your question, but I think it's a multifaceted bit of how this is evolving.
Thank you. I wonder if I can ask you a question that you might not have an answer to. So
Duncan, you know that you don't ask questions you don't have answers to, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I mean, if you don't have an answer, then just let me know. But obviously, this was this was a very big global survey, wasn't it? But I do know that roughly half the responses came from North America and half the responses came from the rest of the world. Can you make any observations about differences between North America and the rest of the world, or not? I know the report itself doesn't make any, or at least the report I've seen doesn't make any observations about the difference of the world, and I think sometimes there are bigger differences between industries than there are between countries. Yeah. But I wonder if or between the sizes of organizations. But I wonder what your thoughts were.
Yeah. So there weren't any like wildly, in EMEA, it's, totally opposite or totally different. All the trends roughly fell. Now, orders of magnitude certainly were a little different. But in general, the trends were more ubiquitous across. Yeah, so there wasn't like any major breakdown. Obviously, we get a lot more questions. So when I think about the verbatims that we actually asked in the survey out of Europe, when we talk about data, there was a lot of questions that came. Well, what about the data? Where does it reside? And like as certainly data privacy and security. What are you doing with the data? Like those were the kinds of things that would come up more so as we looked outside of the U.S. Certainly that was a question, but I think we see that as a general trend in just. But that was an area of more of questionings around the solutions versus or questioning around what can be done with data versus everyone said I'd still like to use the data to make some of these decisions, right? So it's just about how do you do that in a way that's the right way.
Yeah. One of the things I thought was very powerful, I mean, I've heard you do it, I think I also see it in the survey results, is to make this strong connection between this seamlessness and the use of the smartphone, and yet so much infrastructure, and yet so much enterprise infrastructure, of course, is not the smartphone, and so this keys into this massive move to hybrid working that we've seen through the pandemic, the rise of bring your own device. I mean, a whole series of extremely complex negotiations between organizations and employees on, are they carrying the employer's software on their personal devices or whatever. What comes across is that security professionals strongly feel this pain. I mean, they're speaking to users who are just saying, why can't I? This is insane. You're doing this way. You're doing this way. Why can't I do this using my phone? What is the bigger inhibitor here? I mean, is it the kind of legacy infrastructure that is hard to interoperate with mobile devices? Is it the kind of legacy providers of security solutions? Obviously, systems integrators, services companies have always played a really profound role, not just in gluing these solutions down, but even acting as pioneers for firms like Brevo that solve these problems. So is there like one particular bottleneck, or are all of these stakeholders struggling to catch up?
Yeah, I don't know if there's one particular bottleneck. I think there's I will answer a little bit like it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? And so people, I think there's also a education standpoint of what can be done and how, especially for the very very security conscious and oriented organizations, about understanding what that credential is on the phone and how it works. so that they're comfortable in how that's deployed versus this plastic thing. When you actually have the conversation, you talk about like these plastic badges and things, right? Then you're like, oh, I totally get it. Yeah, you're right. But I think it's just a change in the mindset, because all we've known in the majority of cases have been carrying around this piece of plastic. And so it's a mind shift change. It's an education to understand what's out there and what's available. Like we're just seeing this now as we roll out our employee badge in Apple Wallet using the Apple Wallet technology and NFC. That's a whole nother re-education because it's a different type of technology that we're using. It's not a Bluetooth solution. I mean, so that's I think it's just that evolution of change. And in my mind, and that, you know, I could be off here, but that physical access control has just kind of lived for so long, and it hasn't been a focus of folks to say, well, how could I do this better? But as we've seen, you know, the digital transformations already happened in every other part. It's like, well, let's think about it in this case, right? It's just been a laggard behind a lot of these other areas.
Yeah. And how about executive buy-in? I mean, one of the challenges I think for tech professionals is that, you know, very often we're kind of geared around you know, user pain, but pain by itself doesn't necessarily move people at the you know, at the executive office. And so there's something there about being able to show a solution realistically and being able to show the business value of these solutions. How far is this gap perhaps even closing? I mean, I realize this is obviously the 6th year that you've been doing this study. So it seems to me that this frustration is so enduring. I mean, even now you have like 2/3 of managers still saying that they're nowhere near the cloud level enablement that they want. Is there something that these security managers are struggling to do or need help with in order to outline the business case? I mean, maybe this is a business opportunity for the industry analyst on the call, yeah? But, you know, what's going on that this is still such an enduring problem that is deepening rather than becoming less persistent?
Yeah, so there's two things I'll highlight here. One is, I think, just help in building that business case and justifying that expense, right? And typically what we're seeing and where we're seeing a lot of the changeover is with these legacy systems, the ain't broke systems. When we come up for tech refresh and we're coming up for, you know, another maintenance contract or whatever those things may be, that's when we're starting the conversation, or that's what people are starting to look and say, is there a better way to do this? Or when something breaks, because things break. And so that's when we're seeing this changeover, and there's like an easier conversation to have to get the buy-in at the upper level. I think when the conversation has to obviously be a business-oriented conversation. What is it doing to reduce my risk? What is it doing to reduce my overall operating cost? Which there are clear cost advantages of cloud and like a mobile credential versus producing a plastic card that gets replaced 2.2 times a year. Like all that kind of stuff, you can build a case. But I think it's getting the help to build the case and understand, even when it's not like that kind of emergency situation where something's broken and I got to do something quickly, is one of the things. And we see, and in the full report, when folks receive it, there is a section on barriers, right, for adoption and that executive buy-in. We have seen that kind of come down some. Especially as we've moved into the hybrid workspace, where kind of the old way doesn't exactly work because there's not a human sitting at the front desk looking at everybody that walks through the door. And so there's opportunities there to support that sort of broader organizational shift to that hybrid. But it's just, I think, I hate to say it, but how to tell the story in a way that connects beyond just, we need to change our security stuff. And I think too many times technical security people you know, talk about the bits and the bytes, not about what it's doing for the business, that business case.
Yeah. And Tim, I think this report does that perfectly, doesn't it? By spotlighting the pain that end users have, and then hinting at the loss in business value. I think we have no more quick questions. Is there anything else that you would like to say? I mean, is there anything maybe that surprised you in the report, or if people have other questions, what is the best way to to get in touch with you. I've just seen something pop up in the, oh yeah, okay, something popped up in the Q&A just now. Big question. Do you see the life expectancy for legacy security access technologies changing?
For the legacy, yes, I do believe so, right? I think you're seeing that shortening, largely because there are viable, realistic, secure options, right, that can offer more value at a better cost base, like cloud-based solutions, like folks, shameless plug, like Brivo, that offer really good alternatives to these, as well as we rapidly think about what's going on in, what needs to happen from security patching and all these other kinds of things in the cybersecurity landscape, right? Having to manage all of that, we're seeing an immense amount of switchover because people just aren't willing to go that old model. So yeah, can I give you a number? Can I tell you that? No, I don't know how much that changes, but we are seeing that the evaluation phase of these legacy systems are shorter cycles than, where they have been in the past. So.
Yeah. And I would imagine that many organizations that had big pain points with on-prem solutions during the time of the pandemic, when some workers were accessing central facilities, but maybe where the IT or security staff were not present, I would imagine that many of these solutions are being reevaluated very skeptically, really skeptically by buyers.
Yep. I would agree there. And it's been happening before the pandemic. It's not, I would just say, I think the pandemic helped accelerate or expose challenges when you think of a workforce that is not always in the office. And that as we work and continue to work in a hybrid, that's just how we work. I don't even call it hybrid anymore. It's just how we work. The way that the operations needs to be managed, or at least to be managed more efficiently and effectively, are happening with some of these changes in technology and adoption of those.
Well, Tim, thank you so much for your time today. As I mentioned at the beginning, we will wrap up this recording and send a link to people who are here, also people who couldn't make the live broadcast, along with a copy of the report. So thank you so much for joining us, and obviously thank you so much for this 6th year that you've been doing this study. I mean, it's a fantastic contribution, and it goes a long way to helping security managers craft this narrative that they struggle to weave out of the experience in just their one organization.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Tim. Speak to you soon. Thank you.
See you. Bye.
Bye-bye.